Hello and welcome to Biz Daily. I'm Jon Jordan. So earlier this week we've been down to the Develop Brighton conference, which is one of the longest running UK kind of game development conferences, and for the first day of that conference they have what they call their Evolve Day, and that's kind of people talking about, I guess, the more kind of cutting edge kind of platform. So a lot of that this year was looking at stuff like VR and AR. And things like user-generated content, but a decent slice as ever was looking about mobile games. Of course, there is the argument that mobile games are perhaps now kind of the major part of the industry, giving that lots of people think money-wise they're going to take over for they're going to be as bigger than console games globally this year. But anyway, that's by the by. So what was kind of interesting was that a couple of speakers were kind of talking about the same thing. So the keynote speaker was Neil Young. So Neil Young's quite well known in the industry, in the mobile industry. He used to work at EA, but then set up NGMoko, that was one of the first kind of pure kind of mobile developers, well funded, out of San Francisco, which was then bought by DNA, and then Neil became kind of CEO of DNA in the West. So he knows the mobile scene very well. He knows the Apple guys very well. They made some very high-end games, and they were one of the first companies to go free-to-play as well, which is partly why DNA bought them. So he's been out in the industry for a couple of years, and now he's kind of come back in. He's got a new company called Network, and he was talking about peak mobile. So this is kind of a concept we've seen or heard a lot about in terms of oil. So there's a concept of peak oil, which is when there's the point at which the most kind of oil pumped out of the ground will start to decline because it's a limited resource, so they say. And there's lots of discussion when peak oil was going to happen, and lots of people thought it was going to happen, and clearly stuff like kind of shale oil and fracking, all that kind of stuff has very much kind of overtaken the naysayers. Peak oil still may happen at some point, presumably, historically. And Neil's taking this idea and bringing it to mobile. So basically the idea is at some point in the mobile games industry, the revenue generated from mobile games will peak. Clearly we're not at that stage yet. That was his argument. But kind of, I guess the interesting part of his argument was he thinks the market can grow 10 times. So that's a pretty big kind of upside. Maybe he was exaggerating for effect. But certainly, on most bases, people think it can kind of certainly double and probably go a bit bigger. But what was interesting from what Neil was saying was he says the only market he thinks in the world which is kind of a mature market, which is, say, a peak market, is the Japanese market. So the Japanese mobile market has been big for a long time. Its smartphones were more like feature phones were more like smartphones, really, but then even when smartphones came in, the revenue generated per person playing games went up considerably, and that's why Japan is still, although a relatively small country, is the most lucrative and the largest mobile games market in the world. It'll probably be overtaken by China at some point, but at the moment, Neil's argument is that the kind of revenue per person that we see in Japan, that will start to spread to other countries. So you kind of see it a little bit in Korea. Korea is a very strong market from a very small population. And while that's kind of, I guess, kind of sociologically interesting and kind of makes sense, I guess, that the way people spend money in Japan shouldn't really be necessarily any different to how we spend money in the West. What's kind of interesting was something is kind of how that happens. So the argument from that keynote and from other talks as well is that the Japanese kind of focused, and actually all the Asian markets, make free-to-play games very differently to how we make them in the West. So in the West we've grown up with playing PC and console games, and they've been very much focused on skill-based progression. So we start the game off, we're not very good, and we don't have very good kind of items or weapons or characters or whatever. And as we kind of go through the game, our items, our weapons, our characters get better. Particularly, we actually get better at the thing we're doing. So if we're kind of using strategy, our strategy kind of improves. If we're doing a first-person shooter, the way we move and with the kind of weaponry improves. And that's always been how games have been in the West. In Asia, that's not really how things happen. There is to a degree a skill-based element, but that's secondary to a kind of a collection element, and that's why card games have been so popular, particularly in Japan, but also throughout Asia. And what Young was saying, and another speaker, Harry Holmwood from Marvelous Entertainment, another Japanese publisher, and Harry runs the European arm of that. And what they were both saying is, the kind of collection element, which is combined with a kind of gacha. So gacha is kind of a randomized kind of offering of these kind of, if they're characters or so you kind of get this randomness involved. You don't really know what you're going to get when you kind of unlock a chest or open one of these card packs, and so that's exciting if you get a rare card. And what's interesting is even if you get a weak card, you can go for a fusion process, and then you can combine different cards together to kind of level up. So you have this kind of randomness, this kind of use of kind of consumable use of what you found, whether it's good or bad, and that leads into collection. Both of them are saying this has been the key driver to Japanese mobile game revenue growth. And both of them see that as a big opportunity for Western developers. So I guess that's going to be the interesting thing to see. We have seen card kind of collection games, over the last year start to get more popular in the West, but we haven't seen them quite at the Japanese levels of kind of deep engaged collection with potentially thousands of characters or cards. So that'll be the interesting thing to see whether that mentality will kind of spread from Japan and Asia into markets in the West that have never really, I guess it's Magic the Gathering, but never really on a wide scale, wide scale, kind of adopted that kind of mentality. So that'll be something to look for in the coming year, to see whether or how far up kind of peak mobile we are, whether the market just doubles or whether the market goes up tenfold. We'll wait to see. See you tomorrow.